Due to graphic subject matter, viewer discretion is advised.
Jefferson County 911. Yeah, there's something going on at Columbine High School. Someone's shooting a gun out here and someone got shot, I think.
I still get goosebumps when I think about it.
They would kill anybody in their path.
We've got a student out here. Okay. He's hit near the spine. He's shot. His face is hanging off.
There's a kid with a trench coat and a shotgun throwing pipe bombs in the parking lot.
He was white as a ghost, just screaming at us to get down.
One of the gunmen came over to my table and looked underneath.
How could this be the last day of my life?
Police tell us there are even more victims still trapped inside the school.
I just had a horrible feeling.
My son. They haven't found my son.
They weren't coming home.
And I've got every student in this library on the floor. You better stay on the floor. The gun is right outside the library door.
I wasn't prepared to see that. I don't know how anybody could prepare themselves to see that.
City in fear. Here's John Siegenthaler.
Most people move to the suburbs to feel safe, to escape the violence and crime often found in inner city neighborhoods. But on April 20th, 1999, the quiet suburb of Littleton, Colorado, became the scene of one of the most horrific crimes in our nation's history. The entire country was shocked and saddened by the terrifying events at Columbine High School that day, and left wondering if anyone or any place is truly safe.
We all like to think out here in Denver that we know the great secret, that this is a great place to live, and we are very proud of our communities, and we take an enormous amount of pride in living here.
When we moved here, I had the opportunity to choose any area, and I was very impressed with the Littleton community. I was very impressed with their family values, all of the open space, the parks.
It's close to the mountains, definitely the foothills. You can see them basically right out, your front window. It's a calm, peaceful community, definitely family-oriented.
I've always felt safe here. Never worried about anything bad happening here or, things that you hear about on the news. Those things don't happen here in Littleton.
Like many suburban communities, Littleton prides itself on its schools. Among the largest is Columbine High, a sprawling campus named after the Colorado state flower and nestled against a scenic park and lake.
I had heard about Columbine High School, and we wanted that for our children. It was a beautiful school. We had a tour of the school. It was great.
I loved my high school. It was just definitely a great place to meet friends, and everybody lived so close. It was just a really good, fun time.
It was a very, very nice school, very beautiful. I really enjoyed my education there. I liked, the friends that I had and everything.
I've been at Columbine High School 27 years. This is my 10th year as principal. There hasn't been a day that I wake up in the morning saying, I don't want to be at Columbine. I am so lucky to be in a job I love.
For the residents of Littleton, Tuesday, April 20th, 1999 begins as a beautiful Colorado spring day.
It was a busy morning. Our little poodle needed to go to the groomer. It was trash day. Dave was running just a little bit late. He wasn't late. He always likes to get to the school early to make coffee because he always thought he made a coffee better than any of the other teachers.
Linda's husband, William Dave Sanders, has been a popular teacher and coach at Columbine High School for 25 years.
I remember watching him back out of the garage. He took my car that day because I was taking my mom out because it was her birthday. And it was such a busy morning. We forgot to kiss each other goodbye that morning.
Danny had his school picture taken, and I kept asking for the picture and everything, and I never got it and never got it. Well, that morning, He pulled that out of his backpack and he said, "Oh, I keep forgetting to give this to you." And he gave me his school pictures the morning of the 20th.
I had a crush on a guy named Troy, and I had found out that he had liked me on the cheerleading meeting on Monday, in April 19th. I couldn't even sleep the night before. I wanted to go to school so bad. You know, because the first time you're going to speak with your crush, I remember it was set up during lunch hour that I was going to talk to him. So I was so excited.
I was a sophomore at Columbine, and I had a math test coming up, and I was kind of borderline between an A and a B, and so I was thinking about just stuff like that, nothing really out of the ordinary, nothing, you know, just kind of an average day.
For most of the students and teachers at Columbine, there is nothing at all unusual about that morning. But Brooks Brown recalls the first moment he sensed something was strange.
Third hour is when April 20th became kind of an odd day because Eric missed class.
18-year-old Eric Harris, along with another senior, Dylan Klebold, are friends of Brooks. And with graduation just a few weeks away, Brooks is surprised that Eric isn't in class.
Eric was very type A with his grades. Every report was on time, and we had a big test on Chinese philosophy, and he wasn't there. And that was just so odd. He had to have been sick. And we went on to our fourth hour class. Eric's not there, and Dylan's not there. Two friends don't show up. That doesn't mean they're sick. It means they ditched class. And for them to ditch 2 periods in a row was just a little strange, to say the least.
11 a.m., 3 miles from Columbine High School, 2 backpacks containing pipe bombs and small propane tanks explode in an open field, igniting a grass fire.
Fire department, state emergency.
Yeah, I'm looking out my window. There seems to be a fire, an explosion, some kind off Wadsworth.
As police and firefighters rush to the scene, they have no idea the bombs are a diversionary tactic and part of a sinister plot about to unfold at Columbine. At the school, hundreds of students pour into the cafeteria for lunch. Outside, Brooks Brown is about to leave the school grounds for a cigarette when he notices Eric Harris pull into the student parking lot.
And he parked in a space that wasn't his. It didn't strike me as too weird. He seemed in a rush. So I walked over to him when he got out of his car and said something along the lines of, "You're stupid for missing the test." Asked him where he'd been. He said that the test didn't matter anymore. He said to me, "Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home." I went off to finish my cigarette. I was debating what I was going to do for fifth hour when I heard the gunshots.
April 20th, 1999. At 11:19 a.m., gunmen wearing black trench coats and armed with sawed-off shotguns and semi-automatic weapons climbed the stairs on the west side of Columbine High School and opened fire.
I looked to my left and I saw the 2 gunmen shooting 2 kids sitting against a wall, and it actually didn't occur to me that it was actual gunfire. I thought it was paintball or something like that. That was my first impression.
Among the first students shot is 17-year-old Rachel Scott, who is struck in the arm, leg, and chest before suffering a fatal head wound. Next, the gunmen fire at 3 boys leaving the cafeteria, killing 15-year-old Daniel Rohrbaugh.
The next thing I remember is being shot in the leg. As I was running, I got shot in the back of the neck and the back of the arm. The bullet that hit my leg severed my artery, and then the bullet that hit my neck shattered 2 inches of my jaw and just came out like right above my lip here. I had no idea what was happening to me. I didn't know why.
Inside the school, students and faculty are still unaware of the carnage outside the building.
Lunchroom is insane chaotic at lunch because there's so many kids down there at one time and everybody's just chatting and laughing and being crazy kids. People started saying they noticed something in the parking lot, and it got everyone's attention because all of a sudden things got quiet.
Dave Sanders is among the first faculty members to realize what is happening. As captured on this surveillance video, he rushes from the cafeteria after warning the students to take cover.
There was complete terror on Dave Sanders' face. And to see somebody that you look up to and that you trust, he was white as a ghost, just screaming at us to get down. We were all crowded under the table, and
I'm shaking, and most of the girls were literally shaking, and we were like, what's going on? You know, whispering, just like, oh my God, I don't know. And a couple kids were laughing because they thought, oh my God, this is the best senior joke ever. And then you started hearing people screaming. People started panicking and running every which way possible, flying up from underneath the table. It literally felt like a wave coming at you. And I honestly didn't know what direction to run. So I was like, all right, I'll just run this direction, and ran up the stairs. And I remember girls losing their shoes on the stairs. But the worst part is when I got to the top of the stairs is when I truly heard gunshots.
Jefferson County 911. Yeah, there's something going on at Columbine High School. Someone's shooting a gun out here, and someone got shot, I think. Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, do you have an emergency?
Yes, we do. We have automatic weapons, okay?
Yes.
Can you guys send lots and lots of paramedics?
Well, I think I might have gotten one of the first calls, and so at first I wasn't sure what to think, if this was a prank call or just really what was going on, because I hadn't heard anything about this happening yet.
Jefferson County 911.
There's kids in Columbine with guns and grenades.
Guns and grenades?
They're shooting off the guns and they're throwing the grenades on the roof.
Okay. Can you give me any kind of description?
Like a black trench coat.
A black trench coat?
Black trench coat.
1 mil?
And there was another guy wearing a white shirt.
They were giving me descriptions of the suspects, and they weren't sure how many were involved, because of course those are the questions you ask. Do you know how many are there? How many shots have been fired? Do you know the suspects, the descriptions of the suspects?
Do you know where the suspect is? He's shooting everywhere. He's out in the back area. He's out in the common shooting.
I still get chills. I still get goosebumps when I think about it. And when I think about what the kids were telling me, and trying to stay calm, and trying to be the voice of authority and letting somebody know, it's okay, help is there, help is coming.
While dozens of students flee the school, running to neighborhood houses for help, police and paramedics arrive on the scene.
Currently working the area and the building, looking for additional victims and suspects.
The officers didn't know what they were going into other than shots fired. We knew the officers were getting shot at. We knew there were explosions because they also aired that. The officers on scene were frantic.
Right now, emergency code 10 from Arapahoe County. There have been shots fired in the gym area. Possible suspect.
1544.
The radio traffic was insane. It never stopped. I had officers calling for ambulances, so many I can't even tell you.
Triage 1.
Yukon and Kelly is where we have a party shot. We need assistance.
I remember I was standing by the assignment desk, and our assignment editor announced to the newsroom that he heard a report of shots being fired and explosions at Columbine High School. My initial reaction was probably a false report. This is not the type of thing that you would imagine to happen at a suburban high school. But then the reports kept coming in. More and more squad cars called to the scene, and we quickly realized this wasn't a false alarm. This was real.
Inside the school, as Dave Sanders races through the halls trying to warn students and teachers, he suddenly confronts the gunman.
I believe that once he realized that they were going to shoot him, he turned around and started running back. He was looking back at them, and at that point he was shot behind the ear and came out his mouth, and he was also shot in the shoulder.
Marjorie Lindholm is among the students in a science room down the hall.
2 teachers brought Mr. Sanders into our classroom. He was bleeding very badly. It wasn't a little bit of blood, it was quite a bit of blood. So then we're like, oh my God, we have to hide. So one of the teachers flipped the tables to hide us. I couldn't stop screaming, oh my God, I'm never gonna see my mother again. I'm never gonna see my brother or sister. How could this be the last day of my life?
April 20th, 1999. Shortly before noon, Columbine High School in suburban Littleton, Colorado has become a scene of mass confusion and terror.
We understand that there were at least 2 explosions earlier on, and that kind of jives with what the eyewitnesses were saying, that these suspects had pipe bombs inside their trench coats along with the automatic weapons.
You know, it's almost hard to describe the situation around here. It is so chaotic. Kids are shaking, they're crying, they're screaming. None of them have ever seen anything like this.
As you might imagine, when something like this happens, there's mass panic, and it's extremely difficult to figure out exactly what's going on because you're getting lots of different stories.
Even with all the confusion, people were quickly able to determine that something bad was going on. Very bad. In fact, on a scale that has not been seen in this community.
I was in my backyard doing some work, and I noticed helicopters and heard sirens, and went inside to see what was going on, turned on the TV. Just couldn't believe that something like that would happen.
I remember distinctly being at work and one of my employees coming out and telling me that there had been a shooting at the high school, and I thought he was kidding and that it was just some kind of senior prank. And he said, no, it really happened. And then we started seeing the police cars and sirens after siren after siren.
We've got a student out here. Okay. He's hit near the spine. We've got another kid who's shot in the face. He's shot. Nothing in the face is hanging off. Okay. We've got another one who's shot and is not breathing. Okay. The guy is in a black trench coat. Checking the shotgun. They just shot somebody inside the temperature. I'm going to have to try and get out here and call you back. Okay.
I knew that my son should be at lunch and would likely be in the Commons. And my daughter called me, and I barely recognized her voice. She was very panicked. She was crying over the phone, telling me that someone was inside the school and they had guns. They were shooting people. I asked her to barricade herself into the room, and I was just trying to make sure she understood that someone would come for her.
Tom Mauser recalls when he first got the news that his son Daniel might be in danger.
My first thought was, there's 2,000 students there. Daniel was 1 in 2,000. Daniel was not someone who's going to be engaged in a fight or having somebody mad at him. No, that wouldn't be Daniel.
Inside Columbine, dozens of students in the school library hide under their tables while a teacher frantically calls 911.
And I've got every student in this library on the floor. You better stay on the floor. The gun is right outside the library door.
A pipe bomb went off outside of the library, and it began to flood with smoke, and the fire alarm was going off. And I remember being under my table, and I saw these 2 big black figures enter the library. And it was just almost like they were these shadows that came storming in with such a presence and so much power. And I remember them just shouting and saying, everyone get ready to die. They started in the first section of the library. I remember watching them stick their gun under the computer cubicle in front of me and pulling the trigger, and just hearing the moan of the person that was underneath there. I was wondering what it would be like to be shot, because that was obviously how I was gonna go if that happened. And just thinking that this may be my last day here on Earth. I may not ever see anything else. Every single time it went off, it would kind of jolt you and kind of make your heart sink, and you would think, what just happened? What happened when that gunshot went off? Whose life was just ended as a result of it?
In a matter of minutes, the gunman killed 10 students in the library at point-blank range.
When it was close to them being done, one of the gunmen came over to my table and looked underneath. And I was just kind of hunched in this little ball under the table. Soon after that, I don't know why, they, spared me and they left. We just all kind of had a sense of knowing that we needed to get out of there. And I just remember just running as fast as I possibly could with the rest of these students.
Code 0, suspect safety among the people coming out.
While police await the arrival of the SWAT team, a cul-de-sac behind the school becomes a triage area for the wounded.
I got into the area of the school before they started shutting off all the roads, which is one of the first things that the police did. And so I got in to a neighborhood that was right across the street from the school. And as I walked down the street, there were just all of these kids, you know, many of them bleeding, laying on driveways, and people running out of their houses. It was just this very chaotic, surreal scene.
I looked out the window, and there's a kid with a trench coat and a shotgun throwing pipe bombs in the parking lot, and then he shot a girl outside. And then he came into the cafeteria, and you could hear, like, bombs and shotguns going off.
I was in my math class, and all of a sudden, like 5 or 6 kids came running in, and they all told us to get down because there was gunshots, and we all got down, and we crawled out, and we all ran just across the street, and you could still hear the gunshots going off as we were going.
Kids were bleeding all over lawns, and some lady from a house, I said, my husband is a teacher there, and she handed me her cell phone. And I tried to call his office, and of course, you know, the phones were all jammed. And then I thought, well, I gotta get home. He's gonna call me. I gotta get home.
Linda has no way of knowing that her husband has been critically wounded inside the school.
Mr. Sanders, after about 20 minutes, was getting very cold. He was coughing up a lot of blood at that time, and it was very uncomfortable for him to lie there. So a few of the boys had taken off their shirts. We eventually used them to keep him warm because he was going into shock.
The shootings at Columbine High School on the morning of April 20th, 1999, left the residents of Littleton, Colorado in shock and disbelief. While hundreds of students managed to escape uninjured, many suffered life-threatening wounds and were rushed to area hospitals. Parents waiting outside were horrified to hear that some of the students had been killed, and notes from the gunman released in 2006 show they had hoped to kill hundreds that day.
The closer you got to the school, the traffic was just insane. Parents were abandoning their cars on the road and just leaving them and running toward the school.
There were a lot of parents that were in a panic to get through the police lines to where their kids were, and that wasn't allowed. I mean, this perimeter had been secured, and I understand that that had to be, but it was difficult for parents on the telephone with their kids saying, come and get me, and they couldn't get to them.
Jason Cornelius, you know him? Or Robin Hero, my daughter. Robin Hero, my daughter. Robin Hero, Jason Cornelius, you know him?
SWAT team is actually forming behind here. They've just put on their full body armor, and it appears that they're getting ready to move in as well.
Keep your eyes peeled, they're going in the building.
Police Sergeant Jeff Streeter is among the SWAT team members who prepare to enter the building.
I think the biggest thing that I saw was a lot of unknown. Because so much of what we were dealing with at this point early on was exactly that. It was unknown what we were dealing with, what we were going to see. Police officers are afraid. And if they tell you they're not afraid going into situations, then, you know, they're fools. I know I said a prayer before I went to that school.
There were so many things exploding and pipe bombs and weird things going on and shots fired. It was just in their voices. You could tell they didn't know what was happening, what was, you know, what they would find around the next corner.
Okay, M31 from the SWAT teams, all paramedics into the building to be directed in, multiple victims.
We were dealing with so many things, with screaming students, with strobe lights that were going off within the hallway, with fire alarms.
As anxious parents and classmates look on, the SWAT team removes the students from the school.
Be advised, all patients will be coming out of the east side of the building.
I saw absolutely sheer terror, shock in some of these kids. I saw other kids, you know, not having obvious signs of trauma, but they had the psychological trauma of seeing whatever they saw.
It's kind of interesting. You see some students have got their hands up over their heads, almost like they were a suspect. I think maybe for safety, for officer safety, they're making sure that none of these possibly are any of the suspects.
But even while traumatized students are rushed to safety, the lack of information on the gunmen's identities and whereabouts only heightens the sense of fear throughout the community.
I think my greatest fear that day was that the gunman had escaped from the school and that they would run anywhere that they could to get away from the police, to get away from all of the emergency workers that were there that day, and that they would kill anybody in their path. There was so much confusion and so much fear that day about what was going on. Everybody was just running, literally running scared.
By the time I got there, the prevailing fear was that there were more people involved who had not yet been identified. So it was sort of this, well, could there be another attack?
3 suspects walking in Clement Park.
In the midst of chaos and with so many conflicting reports, police have to view everyone as a suspect.
We believe that those are the 3 suspects that were in the school. We are not certain. We haven't had that confirmed. There you can see one of them, the police officer just lifted one of them up. He is being escorted into the police cruiser right now.
Although suspects are taken into custody, they are later cleared and released. Meanwhile, dozens of terrified students remain in hiding, waiting to be rescued.
My daughter, as I talked to her periodically throughout the day, she was losing hope. My biggest fear that day was that they weren't coming home.
This is a very disturbing scene here. It's very chaotic. Police tell us there are even more victims still trapped inside the school. They are evacuating and trying to get more kids out of the school right now.
As the SWAT team continues a painstaking search of Columbine, startling images broadcast on live television capture the horror still unfolding inside the school.
Seeing the pictures on TV of the sign that they put up in the window, one bleeding to death, it gave us chills, and it was so surreal because it didn't seem like it could just be happening 3 blocks away from us.
Just this whole city was just great, because just thinking about it actually makes me sad, but you just can't believe that that happened, you know?
I just kept picturing these kids hiding and wondering what was going through their head when you could hear everything in the background going on. It was terrifying.
Inside the school, despite students' efforts to keep Dave Sanders alive, he dies in the classroom shortly after the SWAT team arrives.
A reporter called and asked me if I was Linda Sanders, and I said yes. And she says, well, your husband's been shot. What do you have to say? All I remember is throwing the phone, and that's about all I remember. I don't know anything else.
We saw the sign that said one bleeding to death. And I remember thinking, that poor kid, whoever it is, just help that kid. Don't let that kid die. And when I found out that that kid in that room was my dad, and that he was the one dying, or who had died, that was very painful to think that I was seeing that sign that was no more than 5 feet from him.
Of 20 to 30 shots just fired west side of the school.
Terror, you know, I think that's such a good word for that day, because people didn't know. And you know that element of not knowing is even worse when your child is involved. It was horrible. It was a horrible day.
As the SWAT team continues to search Columbine, families are directed to a staging area at nearby Leewood Elementary School.
The school authorities set up an area inside Leewood where families could come in and they could get information. And so families were going in and coming out, and some people were frustrated that they didn't know what was going on. There were literally, you know, hundreds of people milling around on the lawn out front.
I just remember the list of kids that they had, and parents walking up there to see if their kids were on that list yet, trying to find their kids. It was probably the hardest thing that I've ever had to do as a counselor or anything in my life.
You got parents coming in, and there's no note by their kid's name, you know, and that became the big task, I think, of the moment, was to find out who was safe and who wasn't, you know.
Meanwhile, authorities quickly usher students onto buses which will take them to Leewood.
gotta be more. We saw way more than that.
One by one, buses would come from Columbine, bringing the surviving students. And these parents would be standing there, waiting, tense, watching anxiously for their child or children to come off that bus. And then some would run up to them and hug them, so grateful that they were still alive.
I started to panic. I didn't know if I'd ever see Marjorie again. There were people that were saying that they had their child and they had seen different people, but nobody had seen Marjorie.
I hate to say it, but this is going to be the place where a lot of the parents are going to be finding out that horrible news.
It was early afternoon, and my wife called me and said that she had been at Leawood, and she said, I've looked for him to sign in, and he hasn't, and I haven't gotten a call from him, and that's not like Daniel to not call. In a case like this, he would call to let us know what was going on with him. And I asked my wife to leave Leawood so that she could be at home when he called, and I went to Leawood looking.
You know, I was just searching every face. We all were just searching for our kids, and then I did find a couple of Kelly's friends, and they were frantic. Have you seen her anywhere? And I said no, and the last time they had seen her, she was going into the library, because that's where she spent her free period before she met all her friends down for lunch.
I stayed home while Dee Dee was at the school. One of Kelly's friends called, and she asked, and she was frantic, have you heard from Kelly? And I said, no, I was hoping that maybe you could tell me something about her. And she just started crying on the phone. She goes, Kelly was in the library. And I said, so is that good or bad? And she said, that's where all the shooting was going on.
The next big shock came to me when I came across Daniel's best friend. That was very difficult. I saw him and his parent coming towards me, and I at first felt great joy that I saw him safe, and then immediately was followed by, oh my God, if Daniel was going to be with anybody, it would be his best friend, Jeremy.
I was still hoping that there was going to be something somewhere, and we'd also heard talk of possibly kids that were hiding in different areas of the school and afraid to come out, and so I kind of directed my energies in that direction, that maybe she was hiding somewhere and still okay.
All that time they were searching the school, you just didn't know what else they were going to find. My greatest fear that day was, you know, that it was going to continue to be worse than we thought. At each moment, we thought we knew what it was, and then we might find out it was worse.
Then, early that evening, the Sheriff's Department makes a stunning announcement.
Sheriff, can you tell us how many people you think may be dead in that school?
The estimates that I have are 25.
25 who are dead, or 25 who have been shot?
25 that are dead.
When the death toll was announced, I remember a lot of people not really being talkative, but just being sort of in shocked silence.
I was standing here in this room watching the TV, and I just dropped my knees. I just had a horrible feeling, because Kelly was a little homebody, so she would have called if she could have. So her not calling was not a good indication. So everything was just adding up to be the most horrible day in certainly her life and ours.
They then asked the parents of students who weren't accounted for to go into a separate room. And then they brought counselors in. At that point, I couldn't stand it. I had to be at home. So I stormed out of there, first walking and then just running and screaming and crying to my car. Started driving home, and a policeman had to stop me because I was driving so fast. And I just said, my son. They haven't found my son. And he just said, you need to slow down, take care of yourself, get home.
I felt so thankful that it was nothing more than luck that Emily and Brian came home to me safe. And then I just remember feeling really bad because I came home, I called all of my family, all of my relatives, all of my friends to let them know. And then I realized Don and Dee were still in their driveway waiting for Kelly. And I'd been so wrapped up into getting Emily and Brian home that I hadn't realized that she didn't make it.
If you look back at the history of major news events in Denver and in Colorado, you would have to say that that date, April 20th, 1999, is one of the most terrifying days in the history of the city and the state.
As the sun rises on the morning after the Columbine shootings, many families face the harsh reality that their children are never coming home.
We opened the newspaper to find the picture of a young man lying dead on the sidewalk of Columbine High School. Our son did.
And that day, we really started to understand the magnitude of it. We started to actually find out who the people were who were involved. We started to find out how many people actually died and how many people were wounded and how serious the injuries were.
Although the number of fatalities is lower than originally feared, investigators confirm that 13 died in the massacre. In addition to Rachel Scott, Daniel Rohrbaugh, and Dave Sanders, the students found murdered in the library are Kyle Velasquez, Stephen Kernow, Cassie Bernal, Isaiah Scholes, Matthew Kechter, Lauren Townsend, John Tomlin, Kelly Fleming, Daniel Mauser, and Corey DePuter. The two gunmen, identified as Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, are also found dead inside the school from self-inflicted gunshot wounds.
Seeing the carnage, having been in the profession that I've been in for the extended period of time, I've seen death. I wasn't prepared to see that. I don't know how anybody could prepare themselves to see that.
Among the 24 wounded students rushed to area hospitals, 3 are left paralyzed.
We had seen school shootings around the country. Columbine wasn't the first, but at this point it was certainly the biggest and the most shocking.
As a community is left shattered, investigators slowly piece together a chilling portrait of the two killers.
There is a story beyond what happened that day. It's the story leading up to April 20th, 1999. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were two troubled young men. They had resentment against other students, athletes in particular. They were the proverbial misfits that you find in every school. Put this against a backdrop of playing violent video games, videos they were making regarding violence, and writings in their classes involving violence.
Prior to the shootings, the sheriff's department had knowledge that Eric Harris had made death threats against fellow students and bragged of building bombs and owning guns. But while a search warrant was drawn up for the Harris home, investigators didn't believe Eric posed a viable threat, and the warrant was never issued.
Whether anyone could foresee what would happen, that's probably doubtful. No one imagined this on such a scale.
This one. No.
Home videos and journals left behind by the gunman reveal that they had planned the attack at Columbine for more than a year. Among more than 900 pages of their notes and drawings released in 2006 is a calendar from less than a week before the shootings with a haunting to-do list. Get gas cans, get propane, film my clips. A note points to 11:10 on April 20th, the exact time Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold started shooting. And sketches appear to show the school cafeteria where police make a shocking discovery.
2 huge duffel bag bombs with big propane tanks in them and other fuels and explosives, and they didn't work. And you know, this is a high school with a couple of thousand students. You know, 500 in the cafeteria at any given time during the lunch hour.
That to this day scares the hell out of me, because there were propane bombs and there was things set to go off, and the reason they didn't go off was minor little things that these gunmen didn't have right.
They had a Mickey Mouse alarm clock that didn't have a metal contact. And thankfully that Mickey Mouse clock saved my daughter. That bomb didn't go off because she was in that lunchroom.
In his notes, Dylan Klebold writes he hoped to kill more than 500 people that day.
The weirdest feeling ever is to know that you should be dead, but you're not dead. Because had their plan completely gone through, I wouldn't be here today.
In the days following the Columbine tragedy, a park next to the school becomes a memorial to honor the victims.
Clement Park, right by the school, there was just packed with people. They began pretty early on a fence by the tennis courts where people would leave notes and flowers and gifts in some cases, and that happened pretty quickly. The cars of the students who were killed were decorated in the parking lot. That was an obviously very powerful scene.
The weather even agreed with the mood as it started to snow, and it was very somber. But a lot of just tears and processing. I remember a lot of hugs.
I tried to stop by every house of the parents who had lost their children to just offer my condolences and just walk in and just hug. And it was so difficult because what do you say? And to attend all of the memorial services. And for so many of our students, it was the first time that they had seen anyone dead. My heart would break each time I would see a kid walk by the casket. This shouldn't be happening to these kids.
There's definitely before Columbine and after Columbine. I mean, because it's like you don't get over the death of a child, you just learn to live with it because you have no choice.
I know that Columbine will always be a part of who I am. But at the same time, I can't stay stuck in a moment. And if I would do that, it would keep me from experiencing the life that I almost lost.
After the tragedy, the library above the cafeteria was torn down and a new one was built behind the school. A permanent memorial to honor all the victims is being built in the park next to Columbine. That's our report. Thanks for watching. I'm John Siegenthaler.